I think I'm having trouble hearing your side of things. Um, Let me see. Now I can hear myself. I'm not sure if you're muted. Can you hear me okay, though? I could hear myself coming through the stream. I just couldn't hear you. I think there's a comment on Facebook that says that Carrie says I can hear Rosa. Thank you for the feedback, Carrie. Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Let me just switch. I have a new soundboard and I can't work this thing. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good.
Oh, my Lord. So again, I'm sorry for the delay, everyone. We have Rosa En Vivo online. Obviously, all of you know her. She's amazing. And if you don't know her, maybe she could just, spend a second or two describing herself, what she was up to, and, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for the introduction, Renee. I'm Rosa. I am just a girl who, when I started going out to the protests and helped out however I could. First as a medic, later, couple months in, doing more streaming and more covering the protests themselves, the activism, and kind of trying to correct a lot of the misinformation that I saw the mainstream media was pushing surrounding our involvement around the protests and our fight for justice. And that really enveloped a big part of my life in the last year and kind of became everything for me. And now we're here.
It's interesting because, as you know, when you entered the scene, everyone was coming up to me and they're like, "Do you know Rosa En Vivo?" And I was like, "No, I don't." And then they told me that you're a live streamer in Portland, and I was like, "Well, I got to check that out." And then I think a lot of people kept bringing it up, only because the two of us happen to be women, or both, of a transgender experience. And so then I started wanting to meet you because I was like, everyone's saying she's such an amazing individual. I need to go meet her. And so we ended up in Olympia together at one point. We were literally feet from each other, and yet I didn't know. So I never introduced myself. I didn't know later until I watched your stream and I saw my car, in the background. But by the time I went to look for you, you were already out of town. But that's okay. That's okay. So I don't think we still physically haven't met in person, but that's okay. It's definitely going to happen one day for sure. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
For sure. So basically what got me into the protests is because, I was working for the Seattle Gay News. I went out there. I did a live stream on my Facebook. It was very informal. There was a lot of, police using less than lethal means, right, against protesters, including flashbangs, pepper spray. It's unclear if they used, what do you call it? What kind of gas is that?
CN gas.
Tear gas. Whether or not they used it that day, but clearly I had my world rocked a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, because it's my job, I went out there and continued to cover the protests. I ended up getting injured on July 25th, losing some hearing. So that was an unfortunate event. I went through the whole OPA process, which is our Office of Police Accountability, and of course, nothing happened. It was kind of a waste of my time. Nevertheless, I'm glad I did it. It's documented, but it's really interesting how these police accountability offices, have evidence. I submitted a video of what happened, and yet somehow they didn't apparently watch the video, or they didn't care, because The ruling was in favor, well, not necessarily in favor of the officer, but a ruling that they just couldn't decide who was telling the truth. And we've seen that time and time again in Seattle.
Mhm.
So anyway, I continue to cover the protests. Obviously, things have begun to wane a little bit, but I'm interested to find out, how did you get involved in covering the protests for racial justice?
Yeah, so that's actually really, really kind of serendipitous. When I first got involved, so the first thing you ask yourself when you start to kind of try to plug into a large movement of activism like that is like, where are my skill sets at? What can I help with? And I'm someone who's always been first aid certified, who's always kind of valued my ability to be the go-to person who, when like everything is going wrong and there's an emergency situation, I want to be the person who's got a level head and is able to be like, you go get the first aid kit, you call 911, and do the whole, the whole first aid thing, and just being a helpful person, even if it doesn't require first aid necessarily. So very early on, I think the first 2 nights I went, by the end of the second night, I was like, okay, I need to start carrying a first aid kit. I need to have some gear. We need to start working on getting respirators. I'm also somebody who's done kind of a lot of um, I don't know how to describe. I have a lot of background knowledge and a lot of info on like PPE and like firearms related stuff and body armor and tactical equipment, and like how do you put the pouches, like how do people in the military and special forces carry all their gear. Those are just things that have always interested me, is I call it like extreme utility, right? The people
Mm,
who are doing, not that I agree with what people in special forces are doing, destabilizing um, other countries and the whole military industrial complex, but they are the experts of that field. So I learned from those guys. And so very early on, I was like, okay, we got to get helmets, we got to get respirators, we got to look at what other activists are doing in other countries and in past movements, and trying to kind of put that all together. So by the first week, I was teaming up with other people that were first aid certified and kind of building a medic group, sourcing respirators for all of us, sourcing helmets for all of us, figuring out how to carry our equipment so that we could be most useful in the field, figuring out what gear works and what gear doesn't work. Like early on, we had all kinds of stuff that we ended up figuring out. Like, we don't need that. We need more saline and we need more ice packs. So kind of starting to hone that in. And one thing I always kind of used as a safety measure was going live on my phone. So I would just pull out my phone when the cops were getting really close to arresting us, when they had the riot lines and they were just beating on people for no reason. And it was evidence gathering of all of the horrible things that they were doing to us, but it was also protection. Like, maybe the fact that I have my phone up towards them will make it so that I'm not one of the people who gets brutalized in that manner, so that then I can go and help the people who have been and patch them up, right? Trying to stay active, so that I can be doing the good that I can do with my certifications and with my knowledge. And the first night that we were at um, the Portland, the Portland Police Union, right? The I remember it was particularly chill. It was the first time I had been out to the protests that early on in the day. Um, it wasn't quite going bad yet. It wasn't to the point yet where they were shooting at us and beating us down. There was still daylight out, and I remember being moved in particular by an older woman, a white woman, in fact, who had her child killed by her son. I say child, but he was an adult man who had her son murdered by the Portland police, and she was just calmly walking back and forth the line of officers with portraits of her son, and her son, like, it was like a portrait of her son, and then the other frame had her son with her grandkids, like with his kids. And she was like, this is what you killed, like walking back and forth. And I remember like being moved by that woman's display, and I remember going live just for that. And I believe it was even an accident that my phone was set to public and not just to my friends, you know, for the live stream. And for whatever reason, it just kind of went like mini viral, you know. It was just hundreds of people all of a sudden watching. I was like, whoa, how is there 200, 300 people on my live stream right now? And I guess what had happened is like a few like people who had been notable for live streaming didn't come out that night, so there was kind of a lack of live streams going on. And then one of those live streamers had found my stream and shared it to his page to kind of be like, hey, I'm not out in the field, but look, there's this stream that's up. And it just happened to be that it blew up, and I was like, there's 300 people watching right now, what is going on? Like, I was kind of freaking out. And then it started, then they came out, and that night I got batoned in the hand, I got pepper sprayed. They came out hard, and I was screaming at them. I remember there was one particular officer who was a man of color who was an officer. um and I remember how I was like talking to him like, dude, like how could you participate in this? How could you be with how could you be on the wrong side of history right now? Like, just try, like, kind of pleading with him, and just trying to see like what goes on with someone who can be a person of color but also be involved with the police, you know? And so, I mean, I remember at one point putting the phone down and the stream was literally just facing like on the hood of a car, because the priority was to treat other people that were there and like using saline and treating them. And so that was the nature of that stream. There was nothing meant to be. I wasn't a streamer, you know. I was just a medic who happened to have my stream up and happened to kind of pop off that night as far as like viewership. And I remember at the end of that, I was like, so do you guys want me to stream again? And everyone was like, yeah, we want to hear your perspective. We want to hear what you have to say about the events going on. um we want to support a Chicana. Like, it was like I was like, okay, I guess I'm ordering a gimbal tonight on Amazon. you know God, I hate Amazon. But that was really kind of the start. From then on, I kind of wore two hats for a minute. I was always carrying a medic pack, but after like a week of trying to do both, I kind of was like, okay, well, we have plenty of medics. Like, there's a surplus of medics. So I can afford to kind of step back from that and stream, and lend my perspective, help the word get out, help kind of try to correct the false negative. That every night when I got home from the news, it was, oh, looters and this and that and this and that, and I'm like, that's not what's happening. These are peaceful protests that are just being like ambushed by like war criminals. And so for me, being able to be on the ground, utilize that same mentality for being in an emergency circumstance and keeping your cool, that I brought to the table as a medic, using that and bringing that to the table as a member of the press was huge. Maybe later, I have the stream pulled up. I think you can see right there, the actually July 25th, happened to be the same night, but that was like the peak of the heaviest, that they came out, for us. And in that stream, I mean, I'm right like 10 feet away from the police. Like, once I knew that I had the kind of the TRO, the temporary restraining order on press, I was like, okay, I'm using that TRO. Like, I'm gonna be up close. I'm gonna be capturing their abuses. They were throwing tear gas canisters at my helmet, like literally bouncing off my helmet and then erupting into flames half a second. Like, if it would have been a second earlier, my face would have been just uh burned. Like, it's just so that same mentality, I guess, was what I'm trying to get at, is that what allowed me to be good at my live streaming gig and really being up close and capturing um the badge numbers of officers that were committing crimes, and the video evidence, really.
Let's take a look at that clip really quick.
Yeah.
And go ahead and play it. Oops. Let's see. Can you explain what's happening here? No, they can't hear you.
There we go.
There we
Okay.
go.
So you can kind of see back there, like the beginning of my streams. So I would always kind of check in. But right here, this night, the protesters did were more active against the fence. This is after nights and nights of being brutalized, and this fence became a big source for that. So you can see here at first their strategy is they're shooting. I'm gonna mute this for just a second. They were shooting tear gas just out of their windows to the people. Here's a good shot. So this is a shot that I was really proud of getting. Okay. So after nights and nights of just getting brutalized, everyone kind of started deciding that this fence was going to come down. And this is the beefiest iteration of the fence up until the final version that had concrete blocks on both sides. But you can see they're shooting just from their windows and really trying to antagonize the crowd from inside. And what ends up happening is they were able to get the fence down. And as soon as the fence came down, all hell came loose, and they just came out in droves.
Wow.
By this time, it was wild because you can kind of see the weird little arms race would be probably the best way to put it that happens, where like the police have like all of this gear and all of this quote unquote training about how to deal with situations like this. And realistically, I mean, they're just coming out and brutalizing people. And so the people are figuring out how to defend ourselves from that, you know? So by this time, like I still didn't have any plates or anything like that. Like I'm just literally wearing a military kind of style like jacket. Oh my gosh, that shot right there. You can see right there immediately I'm getting hit by pepper balls.
Mm.
Immediately getting shot with munitions. They're shooting tear gas out. But like all I had was like a snowboarding helmet. You can see our comrade there protecting me from some of those pepper ball shots. And for those of you at home who've never felt what a pepper ball is like and think, oh, it's just like a paintball. Like when you play paintball, there's a limit to how hard those things can be shooting, right? So they clock it on a chronograph, and there's a limit. When you're in this situation, not only are the pepper balls not full of liquid paint, they're full of they're full of bismuth, metal crystals, which are shards that can cut you, and pepper, capsaicum, right? Basically the same thing as in pepper spray in a powder form. And they're shooting those things as fast as their guns can physically shoot them. And the FN 303 rounds that they use, they're more bullet shaped and they come out of a more of a magazine versus a hopper. Those things weigh like 3 times as much as a paintball, even as a pepper ball. So those things are flying much faster. They hurt much worse than any paintball that you've ever been hit with. And you've seen like people, if you haven't played paintball, you've seen bruises of people who play paintball after they've played around. These are much worse. These are like deep bruises. You can see the tear gas canisters being shot right into the crowd, which by the way is not how you're supposed to use those things. If even even a weapon like this that shouldn't be used against people has like safe use guidelines, quote unquote. And those are like, if you're trying to disperse a crowd that way, you shoot it just off of the crowd over here. So you make a cloud of uncomfortable smoke, quote unquote. It's poisonous gas that will make them move. These dudes are just shooting them right into the crowd. And mind you, these things, the ones especially that they're shooting out of their 40 millimeter grenade launchers, these are on fire. So we'd have comrades we'd have to treat burns on, where they're literally a flaming ball of tear gas is shot at them. Their clothes are catching on fire. Like it was having the medic training and having to like stop what I was doing to help out someone who was really needing it was like one of the most horrifying experiences of my life. Like coming up on like, I'm not gonna name our comrade, but our comrade who got shot in the head with a 40 millimeter. I was there that night, like 10 feet away from that individual. I got to see the inside of a sinus cavity, which is definitely not something I ever wanted to see in my life. And seeing that's different. You feel different after, you know,
Mhm.
when you see someone with third-degree burns all over their body and torso, and you're patching them up best you can, but you're like, you need to go to the hospital as soon as we're done. I mean, look at the level of tear gas right now. And kind of rewinding a little bit back to an earlier point, like by this time here, that arms race had escalated to like where there was a whole technique involved. You know, you had people with leaf blowers. People were doing everything they could to defend themselves from this level of war crime being perpetrated against us. People with leaf blowers, people that had the leather gloves so you could throw the tear gas canisters back. You had your shield wall, your umbrella wall. Everyone has respirators at this point. It was really important and a team effort to kind of get everyone equipped. You know, I remember buying like lots, like boxes and like virtually like pallets worth of like PPE, you know? Like we're gonna buy 30 gas masks over here. Oh, we were able to go to the used sporting goods store and get uh 20 skateboarding helmets and 10 baseball helmets. Here you go. Whoever needs one, come grab one, you know? People showing up with like giant Rubbermaid containers full of gloves. So people can be protected that way. And it's funny that you mentioned how you and I were within like such a close proximity of each other, but didn't meet, because I came later to find out that Ian from Concrete Reporting is right behind me in this shot, doing his thing. And we didn't meet until weeks later, where we actually started to talk and like have, a friendship or what have you. And he's right behind me right now, yelling at his stream, "Oh my God, what's happening?" At this point, I can probably turn this on a little bit, make it. But yeah, that's kind of a big thing that I want to get across to y'all at home is like this. This is like not. This isn't like a smoke machine and paintballs. These are like weapons of war being used indiscriminately on people. At
Yeah, I
this
can vouch
point,
for that.
yeah. At this point, I'm gonna decide. I don't know if I've said it yet, but I end up crawling under this fence, and this is kind of what I'm talking about having that mentality of being able to keep your cool in a wild circumstance. Because like right here, like I'm not wearing any armor, like I mentioned earlier. I'm wearing a gas mask and a snowboarding helmet, and the shield wall is behind me. So the wall that's there protecting people from the munitions is behind me. Like I'm in no man's land. A lot of us journalists were right there in no man's land. So to keep your cool as literal, like those 40 millimeters, if they hit you in the head, that's a trip to the emergency
Hmm.
room, and you're gonna end up in the ICU.
Yeah, we
They,
had
they
in
can't,
Seattle a rubber bullet that stopped someone's heart. So these
yeah,
things definitely were potentially deadly.
yeah. I took two of those in my time at the protest. Thankfully, they were both in locations that did not lead to dire physical injury, but it could have just as easily have happened, with the helmet, it catches you a little bit low right below the helmet, and now that whole protective equipment is negated.
Yeah, I know that between Seattle and Portland, a lot of the protesters were sharing tactics, and a lot of those tactics
Mm-hmm.
were coming from Portland itself.
Yeah.
The people on the front lines there.
Mm-hmm. Goodness gracious.
Hmm.
I want to see if
So
the go ahead.
no, I was going to talk about, um, you know, basically your coverage in DC, what took you there as well as New York, because I remember like tuning in and seeing you in New York, seeing you in DC. So how did you get from Portland to DC?
Yeah.
What happened there?
So I went to DC twice. The first time was because of the March on Washington. So it was the 37. It was the 57th anniversary of the I Have a Dream speech, done by Martin Luther King. Um, and the the folks at Boob Troop, Trey Stewart's stream, were super kind and basically sent me down there with them as kind of part of the Boob Troop team, because we had collaborated a lot, shared all my footage with them. They had permission to share any of my clips, any footage, that kind of thing, to help get the word out there. Right, they had a very substantial following, and we made a good collaboration. Um, they were super kind enough. They purchased my ticket. They allowed me to stay in their same within their network of hotel rooms and that kind of thing. And it was just incredible. It was incredible being out there, seeing all of the tremendous amount of support of people who had traveled from all over the country, talking to Black leaders from all across the country and hearing their stories and what they were doing. It was just fantastic. Um, and then coming back from that, getting back to work here in Oregon, over the course of the next few months, I kind of was like planning and saving to try to get back there. To be honest, it was just it felt like such an important place to be. And after what happened, not only in Washington but here at our state capitol on January 6th, and witnessing that, I was here in Salem on January 6th, and seeing that in Oregon, it was virtually a mini occurrence of what happened in Washington D.C. Um, kind of validated that for that day it was a good idea not to be in D.C. but be here in Oregon, because there was a necessity to cover it. And also, it would have been too wild to be and unsafe for someone like me to be in DC at the time. But I ended up kind of redirecting that trip to be there for the inauguration on the 20th. And it was really interesting because you got to see kind of all of the preparations that they made after the 6th for the 20th, and kind of being like, all right, the whole thing's on lockdown, you know? So I got to see Black Lives Matter Plaza, like not only when it was just like popping and it was like a giant celebration, um and just and kind of like on the first trip there, kind of to give it a full picture, like being in BLM Plaza was just this wild, like almost like the best way I can describe it is like a celebration of life, but for like all the lives have been lost, where like the vibe was very like a party, and there was people always dancing, and like Black joy was there, like present very viscerally, but there was also this somberness to it, you know. Even in the joy, there was a vibe of like a celebration of life versus just a standard celebration. And it was a beautiful thing to be able to be a part of, to be able to support Black business owners who were, like selling wares and things like that, and be able to be like, hey, like I'm not gonna go to like the mainstream, like, memento shop, like I'm gonna, patronize your business here. Being able to talk to people, being able to just kind of like, hey, come on and dance over here, and like plug in. It was wonderful. And then seeing the flip side of that, like on the 20th, and seeing how everything was in lockdown, but there was still that presence of people there, a smaller group, but within everything, like the National Guard was like, yeah, I mean, we're here for the right wingers, not for y'all, And so it was kind of this cool thing where it was like everything was locked down, but there was this little pocket where there was still a few people just kind of keeping it going. Um, that was beautiful. That was beautiful, and that was interesting also to see the lack of presence of all the right wingers. Like now that stuff was actually locked down, how I was like, where are you guys at now? It was very interesting. And that time I fundraised, was able to thankfully have a lot of support from the channel when it was doing well and things like that, to be able to go out there. And realistically, the highlight of that trip, because there wasn't a lot going on for the inauguration. truth be told. We didn't get like press passes to be in the actual event of the inauguration, clearly. So it was a lot of, it was very chill, but it was really nice to revisit. But we were able to go to New York, and like just being at the Stonewall Inn and being able to see the memorial, being able to march with this generation's um leaders from Stonewall, like this generation's Marsha P. Johnson's, was just incredible. Just incredible. Queen Jean is just such a powerhouse of energy and leadership, and just being able to be a part of that, like as a trans woman, like anyone who watched that stream knows I was just sobbing, like reading the plaque of the memorial, like leading up to like for the protest actually starting. And then when the protest started and we're marching, I was just sobbing, just sobbing, just like I'm marching through New York with everyone from, oh my God, from the Stonewall. It was wild. It was wild. And like the energy that the Stonewall peeps have, like just the
Oh yeah.
dancing, the organization, the way that they had like their PA system, like it was such a cool it was just such a cool environment to be in, because being in like Portland marches and then going to New York marches, it's like I'm on the opposite side of the country, but a lot of this is the same, and a lot of this has a different flavor. And this is just amazing to see, like going all the way from the Stonewall to Times Square, stopping at every Trump tower that we had along the way and just yelling to say F you, Donald Trump. Like it was fantastic. It was just one of the best experiences of my life. And being able to go to not only that march but other Black Lives Matter marches. I got to go to an anti-deportation march, where I got the chance to speak. You know, it was just beautiful. It was wonderful.
Absolutely. And I hear about, if it wasn't Portland or Seattle, it definitely was New York. Those were the three places, um, where I heard about the most and things that were happening. Um, Now, I understand, obviously, that the protests have waned both here in Portland. I'm not sure how they're going in New York, but, and you've gotten into some music live streaming and playing guitar. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. It's funny because it's kind of connected. So for me, I've always been someone who owns a guitar and I've dabbled. I never got past like knowing open chords and kind of just the basics, Here's G, here's C, here's A. And very kind of early on there I kind of identified that there was a big need for a better self-care. I'd come home from getting tear gassed, and like video games, like playing Call of Duty stuff was like super triggering for me. It still is, to be honest. I used to be like more into playing those kinds of games than I am now, just because of the imagery. A lot of the stuff is so similar to what we were experiencing that it was just like it would be triggering. And so I was like, well, I can't play video games. What should I do? And Militant Mom, another streamer friend, had a guitar, an electric guitar. And one night I went over to her house and she had a couple of guitars out, and I was just like, oh man, I haven't owned a guitar since I was houseless. Whole nother story. But it was like for one of the first times in my life I didn't have a guitar. I'd been houseless for like a year before the protest started. I had just gotten out of being houseless. And I was like, wow. And we were just kind of messing around, and me and her kind of had a jam session. I was like, this is awesome. I really need to look at getting one. And she was like, oh, you want to borrow this one? You can borrow this one. And I was like, oh, okay. If you're sure, I'll take care of it. And from then on, it was just off to the races. I would get home from being tear gassed, and I would just be like, time to play at least one song. And at the time, because I would just go live and people would immediately come watch, no matter how many, no matter whether I was at a protest or not, I guess is what I'm trying to say. People would hop on and just be like, "Oh, what's Rosa up to? Are you up to self-care tonight? Are you at the protest? What's going on with you?" People were interested in that. And so I would go live and just kind of play guitar, and it sucked. Like I watched back some of those videos that goes on my Facebook, and I'm like, I've come a long way in the last year and a half playing guitar. But it was like a big source of self-care for me. Like when I would come home, it would just be there, and I would just be like, ah, yeah, singing this song made me feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
And as the kind of the year went on, it just kept coming back to it. I just kept coming back to it, kept coming back to it. And then as kind of the protest started kind of chilling out a little bit and there was less stuff going on, not to say that there is not still things going on, but just like you said, it's just a little bit more few and far between. It became something that I just did. Like even when I wasn't coming home from getting brutalized by the state, I would just be like, oh yeah, time to jam out. And then like a big step for me was like, oh, I have enough money in savings that I can buy this guitar I really liked. I finally have a guitar now after being houseless, and being able to return to mom her guitar and be like, thank you so much for letting me borrow that for so long. And so now it's just kind of something that I do, and my development has been pretty substantial in the last year and a half, and now I'm kind of just like committing to getting good.
I'm glad you brought up self care because I also understand that you're into meditation and you're into philosophy.
Yeah, it's interesting because on nights where I was too exhausted to play guitar, I would always put on an Alan Watts talk. For those of you who don't know, is somebody who studied Eastern religions, both Hinduism, Buddhism, Zen, and kind of didn't like convert to any one of those things by any means, but became someone who just philosophized in a manner that was informed by those philosophies and would kind of like think things through, educate a Western audience about Eastern philosophies and religions, and really began to open that up. He was really good at like doing like recording everything, all of his speeches and everything to all of his lectures. So there's a giant library of talks of his, um reading the direct, actual scriptures such as like the Tao Te Ching, um the way the dharmas, things like that. The dharma being like the written scripture of traditional Buddhism. um so for me that's always kind of something that's been like an anchor. When I'm feeling like out of balance, I'll listen to a talk or sit and meditate. I've just always been involved, or interested rather, in spirituality. It started a lot with Western philosophy as well. Like when I was younger and I was just trying to be kind of like a more intellectual person, it was a big thing that I just researched, like reading all of the basic philosophy stuff that they would teach you in a class, and moving from west to east, and putting those all together. Where like I consider myself someone who's like spiritual, but not super woo woo spiritual, and like a philosopher, but not a super like, well, actually, kind of philosopher, kind of like just trying to be a balanced human being.
I know people have told me that you've been doing some do it yourself projects, and I should watch that you're good at it. And then after that, maybe you could talk about also your Rosa Bus and how fundraising is going for that.
Yeah. So my philosophy is to DIY everything myself. Um, like for guitar stuff, like I've always worked on my own guitar. So at this point, I'm very confident in saying that I'm a guitar technician on a proficient level. Um, I've just always been the kind of person who's never had the money to hire somebody to do things for me, whether that's like repair something that I own, do scheduled maintenance on a vehicle, um refret my guitars, or level and crown and polish the frets on my guitar. Those are all things that, even if they're on a higher level, I'm like, I can learn that. And it's not only will it be cheaper than paying somebody to do that for me, I will have a new skill in my back pocket, so it's like double the value. And so that's always been my mentality with everything. So like at this point, like I've repaired guitar pedals, I've repaired guitars, I've worked on my own car, changed the own oil. I recently changed my own spark plugs, which was kind of like a new thing, a new uh uh it's just something I hadn't done yet. When I needed to have logos done, I made my own logos, and like way back in the day, I'm talking when I had logos for other stuff that wasn't like the stream. And so by learning to make logos, then now I've like made logos for other people and like sold that as a service. So just like always trying to learn new things and um having those skill sets built up so that I don't have to rely on anybody else, and so I don't have to spend extra money. And kind of going right along with that is I'd like to build my own house on wheels at some point, which kind of goes to the Millennium Boognish project, which is kind of a play on Millennium Falcon, but also my favorite band, Ween. Um, and and so for what I really am hoping to do within the next 5 years, is save up some money, buy a bus, like a school bus, and turn it into a little home on wheels, so that not only can I have stable housing and I don't become houseless again like I had in the past, but also so that I kind of have a mode of transportation that's mobile, so that if I do want to go back to covering something, or there's something interesting happening somewhere that needs me to stream it, I can go there. If I end up gigging musically and that kind of stuff in the future, I'm nowhere near that good yet, but in the future, I can do that and travel. If I want to go on to a cool concert or travel, I can do that without having to worry about hotel expenses, like that kind of thing. The way that I've always lived my life and kind of being a little bit more nomadic is I feel like it'll be something that'll be useful. Fundraising is kind of chill. There's not a lot of interest, but if you guys want to help me out, it's all going to be in my link tree. It's on my personal pages, so you can go there. But realistically, it's something that I can save for as well. So anything that like is fundraised is helpful, but also it's not going to hamper the project if I don't get fundraising. So yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
definitely people should check
thanks,
out the link
kids.
tree for sure. Um, Next, I wanted to ask you because, obviously in marijuana, we have legal dispensaries here in the Washington State, both recreational and medicinal.
Hmm.
And I understand you're kind of an expert on marijuana and CBD. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, I'm happy to talk about marijuana. Um, so I'll go into my expertise soon, but first I want to talk about like why, because it's very important and it ties into why cannabis is such a helpful and important tool that gets really a bad rap in our society. Not so much lately, which is nice to see, but I grew up like a lot of you youngsters who are like 21, 22, 23 won't even know that like when like because I caught the very tail end of it, right? It was very villainized. But when I was 18, I believe actually I was 17. I had surgery when I was 18, but when I was 17, I injured my knee. Okay, I tore my ACL and I tore my meniscus, which sucks. You go through the doctor process. They're like, okay, well, we're gonna have to operate on you. Your season's over. Like, gosh, I just got the starting job. Whatever. It's very demoralizing. But then when you're already in this like very negative mental state where like you're like, okay, well, my season's over, my body's broken now. How am I gonna like deal with this? Like I have to deal with all the nerves of like I'm having surgery. It's a very like turbulent point in your life. And at the very end of all that turbulence, they go, here's a bottle of pills, morphine, Oxy. That was not that. That was HRT. So I don't have any opiates on my table. But they hand you a bottle of opiates and they go, "Here you go. If you need any refills, if you run out, just let us know. We'll hook you up. We'll hook you up. Well, you can be on them as long as you need to be." Red flag. And obviously, I am not advocating for going against like your physician's opinions. I did do the first course of painkillers as necessary. The first, I think, 2 weeks after the surgery, when you really need to keep your pain under control. At one point early on, I was like, I don't want to take that one, and I skipped one dose because they were like, oh, you can take this if it hurts, and it was hurting kind of, but I didn't take it and I kind of almost went into shock. So I know the value of like when you first get out of surgery, you need to be on like the right painkillers that were prescribed to you, right? Because you don't want to go into shock. You don't want to. They always say you have to be ahead of your pain, right? This is all valid and true. But the problem is when you get past the initial few weeks of your surgery, everything in your knee is healed up except for the fact that it's still like the structure, it's structurally healed up. You still have some stuff healing. You're going through physical therapy and it's going to be sore. It's not the same as the pain for when everything is like first kind of trying to get back together. And this notion that you could just go back and just get opiates whenever you wanted for as long as you needed was horrifying. So when I finished that initial run, I was like, I need an alternative. Already before this had happened, I had started to dabble with smoking a little bit recreationally as you know, as youth do sometimes in high school. I do not advocate for this. You should wait until you're 21. I like all the little like like fine prints. But before I had even done that, I had done some preliminary research. Like, I didn't want to put anything in my body that was going to harm me. It's something I've always been very conscious of. So before I even started smoking as like a teenager, I had like read some studies and like looked up some research about like if it's safe or not. And everything I found that was done by universities, that was done by like valid resources, said like, hey, like this isn't nearly as bad as most stuff out there. Okay. So I already had that jumping off point. And this is right around the time that the whole like medical marijuana thing had become kind of it was like a new thing here in Oregon. And so I was like, perfect. I had like a surgery. I can talk to my doctor and we'll get the thing. Doctor didn't want to do it. So I went to another doctor that was like a specialized like weed doctor. They gave him a medical card. I started using medical marijuana. It was just as effective for relieving my pain in my circumstance, in my experience. And not only that, but there was a bit of a high with it. So just like the opiates, but this high was more functional. It was not something that was debilitating. And it was not something that I was concerned I was going to get addicted to, like the opiates. So that's all to say, like the power that cannabis has to where it's something that can be, it is actually non-addictive. It actually is a good pain relieving compound. And people were like judging me for it, but it was my way of avoiding like the whole like opiate epidemic pandemic that we have going on, you know, with people getting addicted. Because then what happens when the doctor cuts you off and people start resorting to street drugs, to street opiates? um as
I also,
I What's that?
so I also understand. Go finish your story, but I also understand you're into plants and psychedelics for the same reason, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. And so along with, and this is kind of a good segue that you bring that up now, because as I started to utilize cannabis as a medicine, it opened my eyes to other herbal, other natural, uh, some fungal medicines that exist that are also just plants that grow from the earth, right? Um, and as I kind of began that journey, I got a job at a dispensary before long, before like 2 weeks in, I had been promoted to the general manager because I had already done all this research for myself. And all that research all of a sudden helped me to consult the customers that were coming in on their needs. Like, hey, one of the first things that I started really doing that was big is consulting cancer patients on how they could supplement their prescriptions. They would talk to me about what um what kind of stuff they were taking, how they were feeling. I would give them like, this is really good for nausea. This is going to be good for some of the aches and pains that you're experiencing, and really working with them to kind of come up with the best combination of strains that were going to help them, the best terpene profiles on the strains that were going to help them the most, things like that. And that just like inspired me to be doing all the more research to like to this day, even though I'm not at right now working at a dispensary, but I was uh fairly recently. um I'm the only one who'll sit there like reading the new studies. What are the effects of this terpene? What are the effects of that terpene? What are the effects when you mix CBD and THC together? What are the effects of this terpene combined with this other terpene? What is out there? Because we have universities that are doing this research, that are doing good um double blind, good like chemical analysis, like really like just real science on something that like a lot of people are like, oh, stoner, bro, like cool. Yeah, it's cool to work at a dispensary and you're a stoner, like I get it. But this knowledge is like huge. It's like huge. And people who don't have that working knowledge of what's all inside of cannabis and how it reacts really miss out. Like, to the, like, if I'd have folks come in and be like, "No, it's okay. I'll wait for Rosa to talk to her for my bud tender," because it's like if your bud tender knows, then they can actually give you a real recommendation. And it's a whole different animal than just being like, "Well, this felt like this to me, and this smells like this." And like, cool, but what does it do? You know?
Hmm.
And using that same mentality for like reading all the studies, like maps is an amazing resources. That's the multidisciplinary academy for psychedelic studies. They're doing some amazing work, um like just like trailblazing what this country can look like as far as psychedelic research. For those, that's like Dennis McKenna's, which is Terrence McKenna's brother. That's his organization. They're the first organization that got approved by the FDA that they made 15 pounds of MDMA in order to use for psychedelic research. So they were approved by the government. They made all of this MDMA, and now they're not only them, they're sharing that with other with universities and um, other areas of study so that they can kind of get to the bottom of how we can use MDMA for PTSD patients and therapy. Like MDMA assisted therapy is such an enormous field of study that has just now been cracked open, and it's doing a lot of good. And so when these plant medicines can be studied and we learn how to use them respectfully, responsibly, and ethically, the world can change. The world can change truly.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and I do know some people that grow mushrooms who are into psychedelics. Um, truly amazing people and are doing wonderful work. And actually, I was seeing online some people that are trying to start here in Seattle a little garden of magic medicine. I also want to ask you before you go about a case that happened here in Seattle. I know that you do some bow shooting and some gun shooting.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, we had a very tragic incident here in Seattle where a trans woman who was Latina was shot 5 times. Now, we don't know if that's related to her gender identity, and probably is related to a fraud case. And she had gone to meet this man to get her money back. But he shot her 5 times. Drove to Seattle, dumped her body in an alley, um, and you know, she became the 38th person to die of violence. Who is trans or non-binary in America. And at this point, I know it's over 40. I think 42, 43. And so I wanted to ask you about, gun safety, whether or not you think it is a good idea for trans women to arm themselves, who it's right for, who may not be right for.
Yeah, thanks. It's a hefty topic. And number one, condolences and respect out to the family. Um, the biggest thing I think when you see a case like this is to remember that there's always bad actors in the world. There's always people who are gonna use what they have available to commit to commit atrocities. Especially especially queer people of color, especially trans women. It's not a safe world, and a lot of times we like to think and hope that it is, or we think that if we don't acknowledge that, then it's not going to come knocking on our doorstep. Um, I think that self-defense is a mentality, number one, and I think that there's different levels and gradients of not awareness, but of there's different levels to which someone can safely arm themselves depending on what your comfort is. Okay. I do advocate for trans women, especially trans women of color, to arm themselves. I think that that can look differently for different people, though. So let's kind of walk through going up. And I always say, like, go as high up on these scales as you're comfortable with your ethics, with what you can foreseeably see yourself doing, okay? And how far you're willing to go to protect your own life. But the first thing I always advocate for everyone, I think anybody, even if you're squeamish about violence, even if you're just not wanting to be a confrontational person, like those are great things. That means that you're one of the good, you're on the good side of of human behavior, right? It's not it's not a positive thing to be out there looking for violence. We want violence, so that should go as like a blanket across everyone. But if you're like such a pacifist that you really don't see yourself even defending yourself, do martial arts training. I would say not taekwondo, more something like jujitsu, muay thai. It's fun, it's a good form of exercise, and it'll allow you to be in the worst circumstances, have something to resort to, whether it's grappling, whether it's striking. To be honest, I think jujitsu is just like everything. Like, if you take nothing else, if you don't want to carry any tools or anything like that, jujitsu, practice jujitsu, get at least to the blue belt level. Um, and that will allow you to be much safer in many circumstances. Not every circumstance, though. It's not going to protect you from a firearm. It's not going to protect you necessarily from a bladed object, but it'll give you tools for many circumstances in which we find ourselves in, which are unsafe. Okay. Because one of the biggest things is that attackers can just be bigger and stronger than us. And jujitsu teaches us how to handle an opponent who's bigger and stronger than us, assuming they don't know the same exact skill set. Which is why the higher you go, the more you know about jujitsu, the more levels of opponents that it'll help you with. Okay. The next level would say, and I think that everyone can fit in this category as well, is at least carry some pepper spray. Some pepper spray is such an easy purchase. Buy an extra one. Um, or they even sell like training canisters that have like an inert substance. But train with your pepper spray. Purchase a pepper spray, train with it. Get familiar with the pattern of spray. Get familiar with how it gets affected by the wind. Practice in different conditions. Like, get good at this thing, because this is going to help to disable somebody. Let's say somebody is bigger and stronger than you and they know a bit of jujitsu. This is going to level out the playing field. Let's say somebody has a bit of a bladed object that they're using against you. This will allow that you to incapacitate them so that you can run away. Okay. Next level, having your own bladed object, having your own pocket knife. This is where you're starting to get into your lethal self-protection. I would also include like those keychains with spikes into this mix, because those can be lethal in many scenarios. Once you get into this, now you're really talking about being able to protect yourself, because even if somebody has a bladed object, now you have your own and you can strike before they strike at you. Also understanding that if someone's coming at you and they have a knife out already, it's fair game. Like, at that point, it's a life and death battle. And there's all kinds of ethical questions. You can send me, case by case questions, and it's all this. None of this is legal advice, but understand that having those levels is going to protect you. And then the ultimate level, kind of past the self-defense keychains, the pepper spray, having a knife, is just getting your concealed carry permit. And this is the most serious decision of all of them. Like, everything else, everything below this, I think everyone should have. Everyone should have a pocket knife. Everyone should have pepper spray. Everyone should have some jujitsu background as a baseline. And even within there, if someone's really squeamish about carrying a knife, like I said, then at least pepper spray and jujitsu. If you don't want to even have pepper spray, if you're that squeamish about it, then at least jujitsu, you know? But those three things are an everyday carry item for me. Carrying a firearm is a whole nother level because you need to ask yourself a few questions. Am I going to train at least on a monthly basis? That includes ammo costs. Am I going to spend the amount of money that I can on ammo so that I can go and know that the shots that I'm going to put out are on target? Okay. Am I going to invest in having the whole carry system? You know, in order to be able to carry a firearm on you, you're going to have the firearm. You're also going to have your holster. You're going to have to carry extra magazines. Which firearm am I going to carry? That's a big decision. You know, something that's a single stack micro 9 might be a good option, but if you can get away with carrying something that's a double stack, more like a Glock 46, or rather 26, more like you know, a G3C, something like that, then that's even better because now you go from 8 rounds to 12 rounds. Are you going to take the time to invest to learn about all the different kinds of ammunition you can use? What about watching videos of other self-defense encounters so that you can kind of assess and learn the ethics around it? There's a great YouTube channel called Active Self-Protection. These are all things, these are all considerations that you need to have. Okay. If you're going to carry this thing and you're going to commit to being a concealed carry holder, you're going to have to carry a high percentage. What does that mean? High percentage of the time. Are you going to be carrying it when something actually goes when something actually goes down? Because if it's the one day you leave it at home that something happens, right? So is this system going to be comfortable for me for that? Am I ready for that responsibility that I'm going to have the ability to pull out this firearm and literally have this lethal, like, not even lethal like a pocket knife, but lethal at a range, lethal where I'm making a decision about whether or not this person's gonna like go home tonight. Those are the decisions that come along with that. And I would say, like, for myself, I'm a firearm owner. I don't feel, and this is actually something that very recently I've been like very much meditating on. I think that for a lot of the other everyday carry items, that's enough for me. I know enough jujitsu. I have enough other tools at my disposal that I protect my home with my firearms more so than myself when I'm out and about. That's always subject to change. I might decide I want to drop a couple $100 on a whole carry system. That's a very personal decision for everyone at home. But just recognize the gravity in that. Even with the knife, when you have anything that's lethal force, be better than the cops that we fight. Address the ethics. Address when you should and shouldn't use it. Address having a gradual escalation of force in response to what the other person is providing. If someone is trying to harm you, you can always pull out the mace. You can always pull out the jujitsu. Pulling out the knife is more of a training thing, more of something that you need to know when it's appropriate and when it's not. 10 times more so with a gun. You can't just be flashing the piece. You can't just be pulling it out every time you feel threatened. So those are the considerations. But I think that these tools are everything. Like, if the right wingers and the chuds are going to be all concerned about all this stuff, and a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, you have to learn from them. I saw Kiz, thank you for posting the Active Self-Protection YouTube channel. Keep in mind that dude's a bootlicker. You're going to be watching his YouTube videos going, gross. What did he just say? But these are the people that have this knowledge. I sit there for hours watching firearms reviews to decide on what my purchase decisions for my guns, what's going to be reliable, what's the cheapest thing I can get that's going to be good enough for my purposes, what's going to have the most available parts for it, all these things. When you're looking at research of like, oh, what do different rounds do? Like, what is the difference between a full metal jacket and a hollow point? These are questions that you need to know the answers to if you're going to be a firearm owner. And it's going to take a lot of hours of watching chuds on YouTube. Thankfully, there's more and more leftist YouTubers, I would direct you to Tactical Girlfriend. She's amazing. She's a trans woman who does a lot of cool firearms training and equipment reviews on her page. She's amazing. We need more people like her. Um, but a lot of your time is going to be spent with chuds. When you go buy your guns at the gun shop, guess who's going to be at the store? Chuds. But these things are worth it to keep you safe. These things are worth it so that we have more leftists that are armed. These things are worth it so that we have more trans people of color armed and we avoid having tragedies like we've had.
Yeah, we're two very public transgender women who are trans, and so we get threats all the times. We get
Mhm.
all kinds of threats to our safety. I myself have thought about getting a gun. I won't talk about my other preparations, but certainly it is a concern that every person who is, especially if you're a woman, if you're trans, if you're a Black, Indigenous person of color, if you happen to be a Black, Indigenous person of color who is trans, these are definitely considerations that you need to take into account.
Mhm.
Um, I also wanted to talk about what's next for you because I know you mentioned you may be going into healthcare. And then obviously, finally, how can people reach out to you, especially if they have questions about the things that you talked about today, or just to follow you on your social media.
Yeah. So next for me is uh, I'm uh, I'm currently going to PCC, trying to figure that all out. I'm really right now I'm going to school for pre-nursing, so I'm trying to get. Oh, thanks, Dora. I'm trying to get all of my prerequisites done to go through the nursing program, and just kind of trying to learn and grow. It's funny because I keep saying it's mostly so that I can be the doctor in the post-apocalypse group, more so than like wanting an actual career in the medical industry. But we'll see. We'll see what all happens. Just continuing to learn guitar, continuing on that path, and continuing school, um, and continuing to work on the Millennium Boognish, trying to build myself some stable housing. If anyone wants to reach out to me, I know that the link tree has been shared a few times. You can always reach out. You can whisper me. Actually, whispers on Twitch are kind of a bad idea because I don't see them all the time. But if that's your platform, go ahead. It just might take me a little bit to respond. You can IM me on Messenger for Facebook. You can tweet at me. You can get on my Instagram. Instagram and Twitter are at Rosa underscore en underscore Vivo. And then just like my Facebook. And yeah, reach out to me. I always love talking about self-defense topics, talking about if anyone, like I've been talking to a lot of people who've like wanted to get in guitar and like want my opinions on like gear, on like what to get and things like that. I'm a gearhead. So if anyone needs to talk about like tactical gear, like what plates do I buy, what bulletproof helmet do I buy, like or what what Kevlar helmet do I buy? Bulletproof is a naughty term because nothing's bulletproof. But what gas mask should I get? Like, hey, I'm looking at getting, even if it's not for like protest really stuff. Like, hey, I have with kids, I have allergies and I need to be able to mow my lawn. What kind of respirator should I get? I'm here for that. I'm here for that conversation. Music stuff like, hey, what guitar is the best guitar for $200? Ask me. I'll give you a whole list of them and be like, these ones. Go try them out. Whichever one feels the best to you out of this list, buy them. Um, uh, Anything like that, anything gear related, anything self-defense. You're like, hey, I'm thinking about getting a firearm, or hey, I'm curious about the ethics surrounding this. Hit me up. Hit me up. I'm always happy to have those dialogues and conversations, and share my knowledge. If you want to, if you're having like healthcare stuff and you're like, hey, what kind of weed should I buy to help with this nausea? Hit me up. I'm here. I'm here for that. Yeah, Sabrita the kitty. I think she's right there, right?
I know we've gone past the hour. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I thought it was important that we sort of go a little long, especially because of my tech issues in the beginning, but also because the discussion was very important. All of us trans women who are trans, need to really think about our safety. The issue of racial justice is an ongoing issue. It will be ongoing for years to come. Unfortunately, we did not solve the problem. But I think the protests both in Seattle, Portland, and around the country certainly raised awareness about the issues that, Black, Indigenous people of color in our country have been going through since, colonial days. And so, that's an ongoing discussion. One thing that I often tell people is that, I'm not here to say whose oppression is bigger than another, but for certain, I'm going to stand with you while you go through that oppression. And I hope that goes for all communities, that we stand together, because that's really the way we're really going to solve the injustices in this country, because we have a lot of enemies. So let's stand together and fight against those enemies as one people. So again, I want to thank you very much for joining us. I think you provided your social media input, right? Your social media handles?
Yeah, at Rosa En Vivo. And then it's also on the link tree that was posted a little bit ago in the chat.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for hanging out, everyone. And thank you so much for having me, Renee.
Oh, no problem. It's been a pleasure. And we definitely have to get together at some point.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Thank you so much.